The macabre mystery of the twins that not even science can explain. 1834, Kentucky. Full documentary script. Opening atmospheric introduction. In the dense forests of eastern Kentucky, where the Appalachian Mountains cast long shadows over isolated valleys and mist clings to the hollows like secrets refusing to be told, there exists a story so disturbing, so inexplicable, that for nearly 2 centuries it has been deliberately suppressed, quietly forgotten, and carefully erased from official records. It is a story about twins, but not ordinary twins. Sarah and Samuel Morrison were born on a cold February night in 1834 in a log cabin deep in the Kentucky wilderness. They came into this world together, as twins do. But they would leave it in a way that defies every law of nature, every principle of medicine, and every assumption we hold about the boundaries between life and death. What happened to Sarah and Samuel Morrison over their brief 17 years of life challenges everything we think we understand about human biology, about the connection between twins, and about the very nature of consciousness itself. They felt each other's pain, not metaphorically but literally, physically, impossibly. When Sarah cut her hand, Samuel's hand bled. When Samuel broke his arm, Sarah's arm fractured in the exact same place. They shared dreams. Finishing each other's sentences wasn't remarkable for them. They finished each other's thoughts before the thoughts were even spoken. But that was only the beginning. What happened in the final year of their lives? The phenomena that multiple witnesses documented, that doctors examined and could not explain, that led to their deaths in circumstances so bizarre that authorities tried to bury the truth along with their bodies. This is what makes their story one of the most disturbing unsolved mysteries in American history. This is the story of the twins that not even science can explain. A story of connection beyond comprehension, of phenomena that violated every natural law, and of a mystery that remains unsolved nearly 200 years later. This is the macabre mystery of Sarah and Samuel Morrison. Kentucky in 1834 was a frontier state, barely 40 years removed from statehood, still wild and largely untamed. The eastern part of the state, where the Morrison family lived, was particularly isolated, a region of steep mountains, deep forests, and scattered settlements connected by rough trails rather than proper roads. The Morrison family had come to Kentucky from Virginia in the 1820s, part of the westward migration that was pushing American settlement deeper into the continent. Thomas Morrison was a farmer and occasional blacksmith, a stern man hardened by frontier life. His wife, Mary Morrison, was known in the small community as a capable woman, skilled in herbs and healing, someone neighbors called on when illness struck or childbirth approached. They already had 3 children when Mary became pregnant again in 1833. The pregnancy was difficult from the start. Mary was sick constantly, more than she had been with her previous children. She grew much larger than expected, and the local midwife who examined her suspected twins. On February 14, 1834, Valentine's Day, though such romantic notions were far from the minds of frontier families focused on survival, Mary went into labor. The birth was long and agonizing. The midwife, a woman named Judith Carver, whose journals would later provide crucial documentation of the twins' early life, worked for 18 hours to deliver the babies. Sarah came first, a tiny girl with dark hair and eyes that seemed too aware for a newborn. Samuel followed minutes later, identical in coloring, similar in features despite being opposite in sex. Judith Carver's journal entry from that night, preserved in the Kentucky Historical Society archives, reads, "Delivered Mary Morrison of 2 infants this night, a girl first, then a boy. Both small but vigorous. Something strange about these 2. They cried together, stopped together, moved together even though separated. Have delivered many twins in my years but never seen such as this." From their very first moments, Sarah and Samuel were unnaturally synchronized. When one cried, the other cried. When one slept, the other slept. When one was hungry, both were hungry at precisely the same time. Mary Morrison, exhausted from the birth, initially thought this was simply normal twin behavior. But as days passed, she began to notice things that disturbed her deeply. When she fed Sarah, Samuel's mouth would move in sucking motions even though he wasn't being fed. When she changed Samuel's diaper, Sarah would squirm and fuss as if she were the one being handled. By the time the twins were a month old, the entire Morrison family had noticed the strange connection between them. The older children were fascinated and somewhat frightened. Thomas Morrison, a practical man not given to superstition, nevertheless found himself unsettled by his youngest children. The community noticed too. In those isolated frontier settlements, everyone knew everyone else's business, and the Morrison twins quickly became a subject of gossip and speculation. Some people said it was natural for twins to be close. Others whispered about darker possibilities, witchcraft, demonic influence, unnatural forces at work. The local preacher, Reverend Josiah Blackwood, came to visit the Morrison cabin when the twins were 6 weeks old. He examined them carefully, prayed over them, and declared them to be healthy, normal children blessed by God. His reassurance calmed some of the community's fears, but he privately told Thomas Morrison that he had never seen twins quite so connected, and that the family should watch them carefully as they grew. As infants, Sarah and Samuel were inseparable in ways that went beyond the normal closeness of twins. They seemed to sense each other's presence even when they couldn't see each other. If Mary took one twin to another room, the one left behind would immediately begin crying until they were reunited. It was as if some invisible cord connected them, and any separation caused both of them distress. When they began to develop motor skills, the synchronization became even more apparent. They learned to roll over on the same day, at nearly the same moment. They both sat up for the first time within minutes of each other. Their first steps came simultaneously. They stood, wobbled, and walked toward each other as if drawn by magnetism. By age 2, Sarah and Samuel were displaying behaviors that went beyond typical twin closeness into territory that deeply disturbed those who observed them. They developed their own language, not uncommon in twins, but theirs seemed less like baby talk and more like a sophisticated communication system that they used exclusively with each other. Mary Morrison described it in a letter to her sister in Virginia. The twins speak to each other in ways I cannot understand, not babbling as children do, but true speaking in sounds that mean things to them. They will look at each other, make strange sounds, and then both laugh or both grow serious. They understand each other perfectly, but Thomas and I cannot make sense of it at all. They also began finishing each other's actions in ways that seemed impossible. One would reach for an object, and before they touched it, the other would hand it to them as if they had known what was wanted. One would start to cry, and the other would offer comfort before any tears had fallen, as if they had felt the distress before it was expressed. The older Morrison children found their younger siblings increasingly strange. 13-year-old Martha Morrison told a friend, "They are not like other children. They look at you like they know things they shouldn't know. And they move like one creature with 2 bodies instead of 2 children." The community's unease grew as the twins developed. People began avoiding the Morrison cabin. Other children were kept away from Sarah and Samuel. The family found themselves increasingly isolated, not because of any hostility, but because people simply didn't know how to understand or interact with the twins. Thomas Morrison, concerned about his family's reputation and his children's future, decided to treat Sarah and Samuel as normally as possible. He insisted they be separated during the day, that they learn to function independently, that they be raised like any other children. This proved to be impossible. Every attempt to separate the twins resulted in extreme distress for both of them. If they were in different rooms, they would scream inconsolably. If they were taken to different parts of the cabin, they would become almost violent in their attempts to reunite. The separation caused them genuine physical symptoms: rapid heartbeat, difficulty breathing, fever-like conditions that disappeared the moment they were brought back together. Dr. Edmund Carlisle, a physician who had trained in Philadelphia before moving to Kentucky, examined the twins when they were 3 years old. He was intrigued by reports of their unusual connection and wanted to study them from a medical perspective. His examination notes, preserved in the archives of the Louisville Medical Institute, provide fascinating details. He noted that the twins had similar but not identical physical characteristics, as would be expected in fraternal twins of opposite sexes. But he also documented several anomalies. Their heartbeats synchronized when they were close to each other. Dr. Carlisle measured their pulses simultaneously and found they beat in perfect rhythm. When he separated them to opposite corners of the cabin, their heartbeats became unsynchronized. When brought back together, the synchronization returned within seconds. Their breathing patterns matched exactly. They inhaled and exhaled together, paused together, even yawned simultaneously. Most remarkably, Dr. Carlisle documented something he called sympathetic response. He pricked Sarah's finger with a pin to draw a small blood sample. Sarah cried out in pain, but so did Samuel, who was sitting several feet away and hadn't been touched. When Dr. Carlisle examined Samuel's finger, he found a red mark in the exact spot where Sarah had been pricked, though Samuel's skin had not been broken. Dr. Carlisle was deeply puzzled. He repeated the experiment, gently pinching one twin and observing the other's response. Each time, the twin who wasn't touched reacted as if they had been. They felt what the other felt. In his notes, Dr. Carlisle wrote, "I have examined many sets of twins in my medical career and have read extensively about twin studies conducted in Europe. I have never encountered nor read of anything resembling what I observe in the Morrison twins. They appear to share sensation in a manner that defies medical explanation. There is no known nervous connection between separate individuals that could account for this phenomenon." He concluded his examination by recommending that the twins be studied more extensively by medical institutions. But the Morrison family, already overwhelmed by the strangeness of their children and the community's reactions, refused. They wanted their children to have as normal a life as possible, not to be treated as medical curiosities. As Sarah and Samuel grew from toddlers into young children, the phenomena surrounding them only intensified. By age 5, their connection had developed in ways that went beyond physical sensation into territory that seemed to involve thought and consciousness itself. They would start sentences that the other would finish, not in the cute way that close siblings sometimes do, but in complex, sophisticated ways that indicated they were literally sharing thoughts. One would begin speaking about a subject, and the other would continue the exact thought, using the same vocabulary and structure, as if a single mind was speaking through two mouths. Mary Morrison described an incident that occurred when the twins were 6 years old. She had been thinking about a recipe for preserving apples that her mother had taught her years ago. She hadn't spoken about it, hadn't mentioned apples or preserving or her mother. She was simply thinking about it while she worked. Sarah suddenly looked up and said, "Grandmother's apple recipe with the cinnamon and honey." Mary was startled. "What did you say?" Samuel continued, "The one she taught you before she died, with the special timing for the sugar." Mary was shaken. There was no way the children could have known what she was thinking. She hadn't spoken of her mother's apple-preserving recipe in years. Yet somehow, the twins had accessed her thoughts. This wasn't an isolated incident. Over and over, the twins demonstrated knowledge of things they couldn't possibly know through normal means. They would mention events happening elsewhere in the community that no one had told them about. They would refer to conversations that had happened when they weren't present. They would know what gifts they were receiving before they were opened, what meals were being prepared before they saw the food, what decisions their parents were making before those decisions were announced. The family tried to keep these incidents quiet, but word spread. The community's unease turned to fear. People began crossing themselves when the Morrison twins passed. Some called them touched by the devil. Others said they were witches or possessed by unnatural spirits. Reverend Blackwood returned to examine the twins when they were 7 years old. This time, his conclusion was less reassuring. While he didn't declare them demonic, he did suggest that they were marked by some force beyond normal human experience. He recommended that they be baptized again, that the family pray constantly, and that the children be taught scripture and proper religious behavior to counteract whatever unnatural influences might be affecting them. The Morrison family followed this advice. Sarah and Samuel were taught to read using the Bible. They attended church services regularly. They were instructed in prayer and proper Christian behavior, but the religious instruction didn't change what they were. If anything, as they grew older and more aware of how different they were from other children, the twins' abilities seemed to grow stronger rather than weaker. By age 8, they could communicate without speaking at all. They would look at each other, and some exchange would occur that was invisible to observers. Then they would both act in perfect coordination, responding to the silent communication that had passed between them. They also began to demonstrate what could only be described as shared dreaming. They would wake simultaneously from sleep and describe identical dreams in vivid detail. Not similar dreams, identical dreams with the same events, the same people, the same conversations, experienced from the same perspective or from complementary perspectives, as if they had been together in the same dream world. Mary Morrison's sister Rachel, who visited from Virginia when the twins were 9, wrote in a letter, "The children are both beautiful and terrible. They have Thomas's strong features and Mary's dark coloring. They are polite and well-behaved. But there is something about them that makes the hair stand up on one's neck. They watch you with identical expressions. They move together like dancers who have rehearsed the same routine. And they seem to know things, private things, secret things, that they have no business knowing." I left feeling disturbed and slept poorly for weeks after. The older Morrison children had their own complex relationships with the twins. Martha, now in her 20s and preparing for marriage, loved her younger siblings but was also deeply unsettled by them. She described feeling sometimes that she was interacting with one entity that had split into 2 bodies rather than 2 separate people. The twins' brother, Joseph, 10 years older than them, was more direct. He told his father, "They're not right. I love them because they're family, but they're not like us. Sometimes I look at them and I don't see 2 children. I see something else, something I don't have words for." Thomas Morrison himself struggled with his feelings about his youngest children. He loved them. They were his flesh and blood. But he also feared them in a way he could never quite articulate. Sometimes, when Sarah and Samuel looked at him with their identical, knowing expressions, he felt they were seeing into his soul, accessing thoughts and feelings he hadn't even acknowledged to himself. The isolation of the Morrison family increased as the twins grew. Neighbors stopped visiting. Other children wouldn't play with Sarah and Samuel. The family was invited to fewer community gatherings. They weren't shunned overtly, but they were gradually excluded from the social fabric of the community. This isolation meant that Sarah and Samuel had no friends outside each other. They had no social relationships with other children, no experiences of normal childhood friendship and play. They had only each other, which seemed to intensify their already extraordinary connection. School was impossible. When the twins turned 7, Mary Morrison attempted to teach them at home using the basic reading and mathematics skills she possessed, but teaching them was strange and unsettling. They would learn something simultaneously, absorbing information at identical rates. If Sarah mastered a concept, Samuel would master it at the same moment. If Samuel struggled with a lesson, Sarah would struggle in the exact same way. It was as if they had one mind accessing two brains, or two brains functioning as a single processing unit. By the time they reached age 10, Sarah and Samuel Morrison had become local legends. Stories about the uncanny twins spread throughout eastern Kentucky and into neighboring regions. Some stories were accurate, others were wild exaggerations. All of them marked the twins as something other, something not quite natural. And then came the incident that would change everything. The incident that would transform the twins from local curiosities into the subjects of serious medical and scientific investigation. The incident that would reveal just how deep and inexplicable their connection truly was. In the spring of 1844, when Sarah and Samuel were 10 years old, Samuel was helping his father repair a fence on the far side of their property. The work was going well until Samuel's hammer slipped and struck his left thumb with considerable force. Samuel cried out in pain and dropped the hammer. Thomas Morrison immediately examined his son's thumb and found it badly bruised and beginning to swell. But before Thomas could even begin treating the injury, Mary Morrison came running from the cabin, nearly a quarter-mile away, calling out in distress. "What happened to Sarah?" she shouted as she approached. "Her thumb, something's wrong with her thumb." Thomas was confused. Sarah wasn't here. Samuel hit his thumb with the hammer. Mary stared at her husband, then at Samuel cradling his injured hand. "Sarah was in the cabin with me, helping with sewing. She suddenly cried out and dropped her needle. Her left thumb started swelling and bruising. I didn't see her hurt it. She didn't bang it on anything. But it looks badly injured." They returned to the cabin together to find Sarah sitting at the table, tears streaming down her face, holding her left thumb. The thumb was swollen and bruised in a pattern identical to Samuel's injury. Dr. Carlisle was summoned and examined both children. His notes from that examination still exist. Both twins present with identical contusions and swelling of the left thumb. The girl's thumb shows all signs of impact trauma, despite the mother's testimony that no impact occurred. The injuries are mirror images of each other in location, severity, and pattern. I can offer no medical explanation for how an injury to one child could manifest identically in another child, who was not present and experienced no trauma. This was the first documented case of what would become an increasingly common and increasingly disturbing pattern. Physical trauma to one twin manifesting in the other twin despite complete separation and lack of any physical contact. Over the following months, several more incidents occurred. Samuel cut his hand on a sharp tool. Sarah's hand began bleeding in the exact same location, though she had touched nothing sharp. Sarah burned her arm on a hot stove. Samuel's arm developed an identical burn mark, though he was outside at the time and nowhere near heat sources. Samuel twisted his ankle falling from a tree. Sarah immediately began limping, and her ankle swelled and bruised identically. Each incident was witnessed by family members and documented by Dr. Carlisle, who had become fascinated by the case and was visiting the Morrison cabin regularly to observe and study the twins. The community's reaction shifted from unease to outright fear. This was beyond the pale of anything that could be explained by folk wisdom or religious frameworks. This was something that violated the fundamental understanding of how bodies worked, how injuries occurred, how physical reality operated. Some people declared it witchcraft and demanded the twins be examined by religious authorities. Others insisted it was trickery and fraud, though they couldn't explain how two children could fake identical injuries that physicians confirmed were genuine. Still others simply wanted the Morrison family to leave, to take their uncanny children elsewhere, to remove the disturbing reminder that the world contained mysteries that defied understanding. The Morrison family considered moving. Thomas and Mary discussed leaving Kentucky, going west where no one knew them, where the twins might have a chance at a more normal life. But before they could make that decision, the phenomena escalated beyond physical injuries into territory even more bizarre and disturbing. In the summer of 1844, Sarah became ill with a fever. Nothing serious, the kind of childhood illness that was common in that era. Dr. Carlisle examined her and prescribed rest and herbal treatments. Within hours, Samuel developed an identical fever. Same temperature, same symptoms, same timing of onset. Dr. Carlisle, now certain he was observing something unprecedented, decided to conduct an experiment. With the family's permission, he treated Sarah's fever with willow bark tea and cool compresses. He deliberately did not treat Samuel. As Sarah's fever dropped in response to the treatment, Samuel's fever also decreased at the same rate. When Sarah's fever spiked in the evening, Samuel's temperature rose identically despite receiving no treatment and being kept in a different room to eliminate the possibility of contagion. Dr. Carlisle documented every detail. He measured their temperatures hourly. He noted when treatments were given to Sarah and watched Samuel's response. The correlation was perfect. Whatever happened to Sarah's body was reflected in Samuel's body, even though they were kept separate and only one was receiving treatment. When Sarah recovered, Samuel recovered simultaneously. Dr. Carlisle wrote, "I am forced to conclude that some connection exists between these twins that transcends any known biological mechanism. They are not simply emotionally or psychologically linked. They are physically linked in ways that violate our understanding of how separate bodies function. It is as if they share one physiology distributed across two forms." News of this observation spread through the medical community. Dr. Carlisle sent his documentation to colleagues in Louisville, Cincinnati, and even Philadelphia. Medical journals published brief notices about the peculiar case of the Kentucky twins who shared injuries and illnesses despite physical separation. Some physicians dismissed the reports as fantasy or fraud. Others were intrigued and wanted to study the twins themselves. A few suggested that the Morrison twins represented some new category of human variation that science had not previously encountered. By fall of 1844, the twins had attracted the attention of Dr. Marcus Pemberton, a prominent physician and researcher from the Louisville Medical Institute. Dr. Pemberton specialized in unusual medical cases and had published several papers on rare conditions and anomalies. He traveled to the Morrison cabin with the intention of conducting a comprehensive study of the twins. Thomas and Mary Morrison, desperate for answers about their children, agreed to allow the examination. Dr. Pemberton spent 3 days observing and testing Sarah and Samuel. His methodology was rigorous. He separated the twins and conducted identical physical examinations, documenting every measurement: height, weight, pulse rate, breathing patterns, reflexes, responses to stimuli. He found that while the twins were obviously not identical, they were opposite sexes with different but similar features. Their physical measurements were remarkably similar when adjusted for sex differences. Their pulses synced when they were together. Their breathing synchronized. Even their body temperatures aligned. Then Dr. Pemberton conducted his most controversial experiment. With the family's reluctant permission, he deliberately caused pain to each twin separately to observe the other's response. He pinched Sarah's arm firmly. Samuel, sitting in another room unable to see or hear his sister, immediately grabbed his own arm in the exact spot and cried out. He pressed a cold instrument to Samuel's neck. Sarah, similarly isolated, shivered and touched her neck in the precise location. He had Sarah smell a strong, unpleasant odor. Samuel, far from the source, wrinkled his nose and turned away as if he too smelled the offensive scent. Each experiment produced the same result. Sensations experienced by one twin were somehow experienced by the other, regardless of distance or separation. Dr. Pemberton was astounded. He wrote in his report, "I came to Kentucky expecting to find either fraud or exaggeration. Instead, I have witnessed phenomena that challenge every principle of biology and medicine I have been taught. These twins are not simply close or emotionally bonded. They are connected in ways that suggest consciousness and physical sensation are not confined to individual bodies, but can somehow be shared between them. I have no framework to explain this. I can only document that it occurs." His report, published in the Louisville Medical Journal in early 1845, created a sensation. Medical practitioners debated its implications. Some accused Dr. Pemberton of being fooled by clever children. Others suggested he had allowed his desire for fame to cloud his scientific judgment. But Dr. Pemberton stood by his observations. He invited other physicians to examine the twins themselves. Several accepted the invitation. Over the next year, the Morrison cabin became something of a pilgrimage site for medical researchers. Dozens of doctors, scientists, and curious observers made the journey to the isolated Kentucky Hollow to see the twins for themselves. Not all visitors were scientific. Some came out of morbid curiosity. Others came hoping to exploit the twins. There were offers to take Sarah and Samuel on tour, to display them in cities, to charge admission for people to witness their peculiar abilities. Thomas Morrison refused all such offers. His children were not freaks to be displayed for entertainment. But he did allow continued medical examination, hoping that science might eventually explain what was happening to his children and perhaps find some way to help them. The attention took its toll on the family and especially on the twins themselves. They were now 12 years old, approaching adolescence, increasingly aware of how different they were from other people. The constant examination, testing, and observation was exhausting and humiliating. Sarah, in particular, began to express distress about their condition. She told her mother, "I don't know where I end and Samuel begins. When I hurt, I don't know if it's my pain or his. When I think thoughts, I don't know if they're my thoughts or his. I want to be just me, but I don't know how." Samuel echoed these feelings. "I love Sarah, she's my sister, but I want to be separate. I want to have my own life, my own feelings. I want to be Samuel, not Sarah and Samuel. But I don't know how to be just myself." The twins were beginning to experience their extraordinary connection not as a gift, but as a prison. They were trapped in a relationship so close that individual identity became blurred and uncertain. As they entered adolescence, this problem intensified. The physical and emotional changes of puberty were complicated by their strange connection. Sarah's development was known to Samuel in ways that were deeply inappropriate. Samuel's experiences were shared with Sarah despite any desire for privacy. They couldn't have the normal separation and individuation that adolescents need because they couldn't escape each other even when physically apart. Mary Morrison tried to help, to give each twin some space and privacy, but it was impossible. Even when separated by walls and distance, they remained connected. Sarah would experience Samuel's experiences. Samuel would feel Sarah's feelings. There was no escape from the constant awareness of each other. The situation was taking a psychological toll. Both twins became increasingly withdrawn and depressed. They stopped eating regularly. They slept poorly, reporting identical nightmares that they experienced together. They began expressing thoughts about death, about wanting the constant connection to end, even if ending it meant ending their lives. Dr. Carlisle and Dr. Pemberton both recognized that the twins' mental health was deteriorating. They consulted with each other about possible interventions. But what could they do? There was no medical treatment for being too connected to your sibling. There was no therapy that could address having your consciousness blurred with another person's. They recommended that the family try to maintain as much normalcy as possible, to treat the twins as individuals rather than as a unit, to give them separate activities and interests. But every attempt at separation caused such severe distress in both twins that it had to be abandoned. They needed each other's presence. They were psychologically and apparently physically dependent on proximity to each other. Separation was torture for them. By the time they were 13, Sarah and Samuel were trapped in an impossible situation. They needed separation to develop as individuals, but separation caused them extreme distress. They needed connection to feel whole, but the connection prevented them from having individual identities, and the phenomena were still occurring. The shared injuries, the synchronized illnesses, the apparent sharing of sensations and thoughts, all of this continued and even intensified as they matured. Then came an incident that revealed something even more disturbing about the nature of their connection. In the winter of 1847, when the twins were 13 years old, a crisis occurred that would demonstrate the full extent of their bizarre connection. Sarah contracted pneumonia. It was a serious case. Her lungs filled with fluid, her breathing became labored, and her fever spiked dangerously high. Dr. Carlisle was deeply concerned. Pneumonia was often fatal, especially in winter conditions with limited medical resources. As expected, Samuel developed identical symptoms within hours. Same labored breathing, same fluid in the lungs, same dangerous fever. Dr. Carlisle set up a sick room and treated both twins aggressively with every remedy available. Herbal preparations, steam inhalations, poultices, everything known to frontier medicine for treating lung infections. For several days, both twins hovered between life and death. Their fevers raged. Their breathing became increasingly difficult. The family prayed constantly, certain they were about to lose both children. Then, on the 5th day of illness, something extraordinary happened. Sarah's condition began to improve. Her fever broke. Her breathing eased. The fluid in her lungs started to clear, but Samuel's condition deteriorated. As Sarah improved, Samuel worsened. His fever spiked higher even as Sarah's dropped. His breathing became more labored as Sarah's cleared. It was as if the illness was leaving one twin and concentrating itself in the other. Dr. Carlisle was baffled. He had never seen anything like it. Disease didn't transfer from one patient to another in this way. Pneumonia didn't move from person to person as if it were a physical object being shifted from one location to another. He increased Samuel's treatment, but the boy continued to decline. Within 2 days, as Sarah was sitting up and able to take food, Samuel was at death's door. Then Mary Morrison noticed something that chilled her blood. Sarah seemed to be getting stronger in direct proportion to Samuel getting weaker, as if she were somehow drawing health from him, or as if the total amount of health between them was fixed and could only be redistributed, not increased. On the 7th day, in the early morning hours, Samuel stopped breathing. His heart ceased. By all medical standards, he had died. But Sarah, in the next room, began screaming. Not the scream of grief for a lost sibling, but a scream of physical agony. She convulsed, arched backward, and appeared to be dying herself. Dr. Carlisle ran between the 2 rooms trying to treat both patients. Samuel appeared dead. No pulse, no breathing, no response. But Sarah was in the midst of what seemed like a seizure or some kind of sympathetic crisis. For 5 minutes this continued. Samuel dead in one room, Sarah convulsing in another. Then Samuel gasped. A single, shuddering breath. His heart stuttered and restarted. His eyes fluttered open. At the exact same moment, Sarah's convulsions stopped. She collapsed back onto her bed, breathing normally, eyes open and aware. Both twins were alive. Both were weak and exhausted, but both had survived. Dr. Carlisle had no explanation. He had witnessed Samuel die. He had felt for a pulse and found none. He had listened for breathing and heard nothing. By all medical standards, Samuel had been dead for approximately 5 minutes, yet he had somehow returned to life at the exact moment that Sarah's crisis ended. Doctor. Carlisle's notes from this incident reveal his complete bewilderment. I cannot explain what I witnessed. The boy died. I am certain of this. Yet somehow, through some mechanism I cannot begin to understand, he was revived, or perhaps he never truly died. Perhaps the connection to his sister somehow maintained life even when all normal life signs had ceased. I am forced to conclude that these twins do not function as independent biological systems. They are somehow one system occupying two bodies. Death to one affects both, and life in one can somehow sustain both. News of this incident spread quickly through the medical community. It was too extraordinary to keep quiet. Doctors who had been skeptical of earlier reports now began to take the Morrison twins seriously. Something was happening with these children that went beyond fraud or exaggeration. Multiple witnesses, including a respected physician, had observed phenomena that violated every known principle of biology. Theories proliferated. Some doctors suggested the twins had some kind of physiological connection. Perhaps their nervous systems were linked in ways that couldn't be detected by examination. Others proposed that the connection was psychic or spiritual rather than physical. Still others admitted they had no theory at all and simply acknowledged that the phenomena occurred without understanding how or why. The twins themselves were traumatized by the near-death experience. Samuel had vague memories of being in darkness, of feeling pulled away from Sarah, of desperate struggling to maintain connection to her. Sarah described feeling Samuel dying, feeling her own life force being pulled into him to sustain him, as if she had somehow given him her strength to bring him back. Neither twin could articulate clearly what had happened. They only knew that they had come terrifyingly close to being separated permanently by death, and that somehow they had managed to prevent that separation through means they couldn't explain. The incident changed them. They became even more inseparable afterward, as if the near-death experience had intensified their already extraordinary bond. They were now even more synchronized in their movements, thoughts, and behaviors. They spoke in an increasingly peculiar pattern, starting and stopping sentences interchangeably, as if they were literally sharing a single stream of consciousness. Visitors who came to see them found the twins increasingly unsettling. They would look at you with identical expressions, tilt their heads at the same angle, blink simultaneously. Their speech was eerie. One would start a sentence, the other would finish it, and the transitions were so smooth that it sometimes seemed like a single voice was simply moving between two bodies. Dr. Marcus Pemberton returned to study the twins in the spring of 1848 when they were 14 years old. He was preparing a comprehensive monograph about their case for publication in medical journals. He spent 2 weeks observing them, conducting tests, documenting the phenomena. His conclusions, published later that year, were cautious but profound. He acknowledged that he could not explain what he observed. He documented the synchronized physical responses, the shared injuries and illnesses, the apparent sharing of sensations and thoughts. He noted that traditional medical understanding provided no framework for comprehending the twins' condition, but he also made a prediction that would prove tragically accurate. I fear for these children's future. The connection that binds them is so complete, so total, that I wonder if they can survive as separate individuals. I wonder if death to one would mean death to both. And I wonder if life itself may become unbearable for them as they grow older and become more aware of their inability to exist as independent human beings. This remarkable connection may be their doom. As the twins entered their 15th year, Dr. Pemberton's concerns seemed increasingly justified. Sarah and Samuel were displaying signs of severe psychological distress. They were depressed, withdrawn, and increasingly expressed a desire to end their suffering. They told their parents they felt trapped. Trapped in the connection, trapped in each other, trapped in lives that felt like a prison from which there was no escape except death. Thomas and Mary Morrison were desperate to help their children but didn't know how. They consulted with doctors, with priests, with anyone who might offer guidance, but no one had any solutions. The twins' condition was unprecedented. There was no treatment, no therapy, no intervention that could address what they were experiencing. The family tried to maintain hope. They tried to focus on what the twins could do rather than on what they couldn't. They tried to build a life for Sarah and Samuel that acknowledged their limitations while maximizing their opportunities. But as the twins approached 16, it became increasingly clear that their extraordinary connection was not something they would outgrow or learn to manage. It was fundamental to who they were, and it was destroying them. Then came the final year. The year when the phenomena surrounding the twins would reach their peak. The year when events would unfold that would be so bizarre, so inexplicable, that witnesses would struggle for the rest of their lives to make sense of what they had seen. The year that would end with both twins dead under circumstances that remain unexplained to this day. The twins' 16th year began unremarkably. They continued their isolated existence on the Morrison farm, helping with household tasks, spending most of their time together, avoiding contact with the wider community that had never known how to accept them. But in the spring of 1850, new phenomena began to manifest. Phenomena that were even more disturbing than what had come before. Objects began moving in the twins' presence. It started small. A cup sliding across a table when neither twin had touched it. A book falling from a shelf when no one was near it. Items that could potentially be explained by coincidence or by unconscious movements that observers didn't notice. But it escalated quickly. Doors would slam shut or open when the twins passed, despite there being no wind and no one touching them. Furniture would shift position. Items would fly across rooms. Fires in the hearth would flare up or die down in response to the twins' emotional states. The Morrison family was terrified. This was beyond the already extraordinary phenomena they had grown accustomed to. This was physical objects being affected by the twins' mere presence, as if their strange connection generated some kind of force that interacted with the material world. Dr. Carlisle documented these occurrences carefully. He set up experiments, placing objects in specific positions and observing what happened when the twins entered the room. He witnessed items moving with no apparent physical cause. He saw a chair slide several feet across the floor while both twins were standing motionless several yards away. He had no explanation. The phenomena violated the laws of physics as understood in the mid-19th century. Objects didn't move without being acted upon by force. Yet these objects were moving, and the only common factor was the presence of the twins. Some observers suggested the twins were causing the movements through trickery, but Dr. Carlisle and others who studied the phenomena carefully could find no evidence of deception. The movements occurred under conditions where fraud seemed impossible. Others suggested demonic possession. Reverend Blackwood, now an elderly man, visited the Morrison cabin and performed prayers and blessings. But the phenomena continued regardless of religious intervention. The most disturbing aspect was that the twins themselves seemed unaware they were causing the phenomena. They would be startled when objects moved. They would look around in confusion when doors slammed. They didn't appear to have conscious control over these effects, but there was a pattern. The phenomena were strongest when the twins were experiencing strong emotions, fear, anger, distress. They intensified during moments of crisis or conflict. They seemed to be somehow generated by or connected to the twins' psychological states. As spring turned to summer, the phenomena grew more intense and more frequent. The Morrison cabin became a place where normal physical laws seemed suspended. Objects moved regularly. Temperatures fluctuated wildly. Strange sounds were heard, knocking, scratching, voices that seemed to come from nowhere. The family was at breaking point. The older Morrison children wanted to leave, to escape the increasingly disturbing environment. Thomas and Mary were exhausted, frightened, and out of their depth. They didn't know how to help their children or how to stop what was happening, and Sarah and Samuel were deteriorating rapidly. The psychological burden of their condition, combined with the new phenomena, was crushing them. They slept little, ate less, and spent their days in a state of constant distress. They began talking more explicitly about death, about wanting the torment to end, about feeling that death was the only escape from the prison of their connection. Dr. Carlisle and Dr. Pemberton both counseled the family to watch the twins carefully. They feared suicide. They feared that the twins, driven to desperation by their condition, might attempt to end their lives. But they also feared something else, something they could barely articulate. They feared that the twins' condition was somehow fundamentally unstable, that the connection between them was intensifying toward some kind of crisis point, and that crisis might have consequences no one could predict. In August of 1850, those fears were realized. On August 15, 1850, a particularly hot and humid day, the twins were in their shared room in the Morrison cabin. They had been quiet all morning, withdrawn and uncommunicative even with each other. Around mid-afternoon, Mary Morrison heard screaming from the twins' room. She rushed in to find both Sarah and Samuel convulsing, their bodies rigid, their eyes rolled back in their heads. She called for Thomas, who ran to get Dr. Carlisle from his nearby home. By the time the doctor arrived, perhaps 15 minutes later, the convulsions had stopped, but both twins were unconscious, breathing shallowly, unresponsive to attempts to wake them. Dr. Carlisle examined them and found their conditions identical. Same pulse rate, same breathing pattern, same physical signs. They appeared to be in some kind of coma or trance state. And then things got stranger. The twins began to speak. Not in their normal voices, but in a monotone, synchronized delivery that was deeply unsettling. They spoke in unison, saying the same words at the same moment, their voices blending into a single sound. "We are leaving," they said together. "The connection is too strong. We cannot maintain separation. We are becoming one." Dr. Carlisle tried to rouse them to break whatever state they were in, but they remained unconscious, eyes closed, yet continuing to speak in that eerie synchronized voice. "We try to stay separate," they continued. "We try to be two. But the boundaries are dissolving. We don't know where one ends and the other begins. We are merging, becoming singular." Mary Morrison was terrified. This was her children speaking, but it didn't sound like them. It sounded like something else, something using their voices. The synchronized speech continued for several minutes, describing sensations and experiences that were impossible to understand. They talked about existing in two bodies simultaneously, about consciousness stretched between two forms, about the unbearable tension of trying to maintain individual identity when their minds were blending into one. Then they fell silent. Their breathing deepened. They appeared to fall into natural sleep. Dr. Carlisle stayed with them for hours, monitoring their condition. They slept through the afternoon and into the evening. Finally, around sunset, they woke up, but they woke up changed. They didn't remember speaking while unconscious. They didn't remember what they had said, but they were different in a way that was immediately noticeable. Before, despite their extraordinary connection, they had still been recognizable as two distinct individuals. Sarah had her own mannerisms, her own way of speaking, her own personality traits. Samuel had his. After they woke from this strange episode, those distinctions had blurred almost to the point of disappearing. Their mannerisms were identical. Their speech patterns were indistinguishable. Their facial expressions matched perfectly. It was as if they had become even more synchronized, even more unified. Over the following days, this continued. The twins moved in perfect unison. They spoke interchangeably, transitioning mid-sentence between speakers so smoothly that it was sometimes impossible to tell which twin was speaking. Their thoughts seemed to have merged to the point where there was no longer Sarah's thought and Samuel's thought, but only a single stream of consciousness that they both accessed. Dr. Carlisle and Dr. Pemberton, who had rushed to Kentucky when he heard about the incident, observed this transformation with a mixture of fascination and horror. "The twins are losing individual identity," Dr. Pemberton wrote in his notes. "They are becoming, in some inexplicable way, a single consciousness inhabiting two bodies. This should be impossible, yet I observe it occurring. I watch as two people gradually merge into one entity distributed across two physical forms." The psychological implications were staggering. If the twins truly were losing their individual identities, if they were genuinely merging into a single consciousness, what did that mean for concepts of personhood, identity, and selfhood? Were Sarah and Samuel still two people, or had they somehow become one person with two bodies? The twins themselves seemed to experience this transformation with a mixture of relief and terror. They told the doctors that the constant effort to maintain separation had been exhausting, and that allowing the boundaries to dissolve brought a sense of peace. But they also expressed fear about losing themselves completely, about becoming something that was neither Sarah nor Samuel but some hybrid entity. "I don't know who I am anymore," Sarah said one day, or perhaps it was Samuel speaking. It was becoming genuinely difficult to tell them apart even when looking directly at them. "Am I Sarah? Am I Samuel? Or am I both? Or neither? I don't know where I end and my twin begins because I don't think there are any ends or beginnings anymore. We've become one thing." The phenomena around them intensified during this period. Objects moved with greater frequency and force. Furniture rearranged itself. Items disappeared from one location and reappeared in another. The temperature in their room would fluctuate wildly, sometimes becoming so cold that frost formed on the windows even in the August heat, other times becoming so hot that people couldn't enter. Light behaved strangely around them. Shadows would move independently of their sources. Bright flashes would illuminate the room with no apparent origin. Dr. Carlisle documented seeing what he described as a luminous mist surrounding the twins on multiple occasions. The twins' physical appearance even began to change in subtle ways. Sarah, who had always been slightly smaller than Samuel, seemed to be growing to match his height. Samuel's features were softening, becoming more similar to Sarah's. It was as if even their bodies were trying to become more alike, to match the mental merger that was occurring. By early September, the situation had become critical. The twins were barely eating, rarely sleeping, spending their days in a semi-conscious state where they seemed to exist somewhere between waking and sleeping, between this world and some other realm that they alone could perceive. The Morrison family was in crisis. Thomas and Mary were at their wits' end, watching their children slip away into something that was no longer quite human. The older children had moved out of the cabin, unable to cope with the disturbing phenomena and the unsettling presence of the twins. Dr. Carlisle and Dr. Pemberton held emergency consultations. They agreed that the twins were approaching some kind of crisis point. The merge of consciousness, the physical phenomena, the deterioration of their health, all of it pointed toward an imminent catastrophe. But they didn't know what to do. There was no treatment, no intervention, no way to stop what was happening. They could only document and observe as the situation spiraled toward its inevitable conclusion. On September 23, 1850, the final crisis began. The twins woke that morning in an agitated state. They were breathing rapidly, their eyes wide and unfocused. They kept repeating in their now completely synchronized voices, "It's coming. The separation is coming. We can't stop it. Dr. Carlisle, who had been staying in the Morrison cabin to monitor the twins constantly, tried to calm them. But they were beyond calming. They were experiencing something profound and terrifying, something that was happening to them or through them that they couldn't control or fully understand. The connection is too strong, they said. It's pulling us together, but our bodies are separate. The pull is tearing us apart. We can't be one while we're two. We can't be two while we're one. Something has to break. By mid-morning, the twins were in obvious physical distress. They were sweating, trembling, crying out in pain. They clutched at each other, holding on as if afraid of being torn apart. The phenomena around them reached an intensity that multiple witnesses would later describe as terrifying. Every object in the room was moving. Furniture slid across the floor. Books flew from shelves. The bed they were lying on shook violently. The temperature dropped so dramatically that everyone's breath became visible. Dr. Carlisle tried to stay in the room to observe and assist, but the violence of the phenomena drove him out. Objects were flying at him. The cold was unbearable. He retreated to the doorway where he could see but not be directly in the chaos. The twins were convulsing now, their bodies arching and twisting. But they were still holding each other, their grips so tight that their hands turned white from the pressure. And they were still speaking in that unified voice, though the words were becoming harder to understand. They talked about bridges and boundaries, about walls dissolving, about two becoming one, about the impossibility of maintaining separation when unity was inevitable. Then, at approximately noon, multiple witnesses noted the time. Something happened that defies all rational explanation. The twins began to glow. It wasn't the faint luminescence that had been observed before. This was bright, intense light that seemed to emanate from their bodies. The light grew brighter and brighter until it was painful to look at them directly. Dr. Carlisle, Thomas Morrison, Mary Morrison, and Reverend Blackwood, who had come to pray over the twins, all witnessed this from the doorway. They would later give identical accounts, each confirming the other's testimony. The light intensified to the point where the twins' forms were barely visible within it. The room was filled with brilliant white light that seemed to have no natural source. And then, with a sound that witnesses described as being like a thunderclap or a massive drum being struck, the light vanished. The room went dark, darker than it should have been even with the light gone, as if the brilliant light had temporarily blinded everyone's eyes. When vision returned, the twins were lying on the bed, motionless, silent. Dr. Carlisle rushed to them. He checked for pulse, for breathing, for any sign of life. There was none. Both twins were dead. Their bodies were still warm, but their hearts had stopped. They were not breathing. They were gone, but they were still holding each other. Their arms were wrapped around one another in an embrace so tight that even in death, they could not be separated. Dr. Carlisle examined the bodies carefully. He found no physical cause of death. No injuries, no signs of disease, no explanation for why two 16-year-old children would suddenly die simultaneously. Their faces were peaceful. They looked as if they were sleeping, not dead. But dead they were, both of them at the exact same moment. The time of death was recorded as approximately noon on September 23, 1850. The cause of death was listed as unknown on both death certificates. Dr. Carlisle, in his private notes, wrote, "I believe the twins died because the connection between them finally overwhelmed their ability to maintain separate physical existence. They spoke of merging, of becoming one. Perhaps that merge was simply incompatible with life in two bodies. Perhaps their consciousness truly did unite, and in that union the need for two bodies ceased. Perhaps they didn't die at all but simply transformed into something else. I don't know. I only know that I witnessed something that I cannot explain, and that I will carry the memory of to my own grave." The Morrison family was devastated. They had watched their children suffer for 16 years with a condition no one could understand or treat. They had seen Sarah and Samuel struggle to maintain their individual identities against a connection that seemed determined to merge them into one. And finally, they had watched them die in a flash of inexplicable light, leaving behind more questions than answers. The twins were buried together in a single large grave in the family cemetery on the Morrison property. Despite their two bodies, it seemed right to bury them together. They had never been truly separate in life. It would be wrong to separate them in death. Their gravestone, which still stands today though weathered and difficult to read, bears a simple inscription: Sarah and Samuel Morrison, born together February 14, 1834, died together September 23, 1850, in life connected, in death united. The mystery remains. The community's reaction to the twins' deaths was complex. Some people were relieved. The disturbing phenomena would finally end. The constant reminder of forces beyond understanding would be removed. Life could return to normal. Others were genuinely grieved. Despite the strangeness and fear, Sarah and Samuel had been children of the community. Their suffering had been real, and their deaths were a tragedy. Still others were simply puzzled and unsettled. What had happened to the Morrison twins? Were they victims of some rare medical condition? Were they touched by supernatural forces? Had they somehow brought about their own deaths through the intensity of their connection? No one knew. No one could explain. Dr. Carlisle compiled all his notes and observations from years of studying the twins. He submitted a comprehensive report to several medical journals. Some published it. Others rejected it as too fantastical to be credible. The published reports created a brief sensation in medical circles. Doctors debated the Morrison twins' case in journals and at conferences. Some accepted the documented phenomena as genuine, though unexplained. Others insisted the whole thing had to be fraud or mass delusion, despite the quality and quantity of witnesses. Dr. Marcus Pemberton published his monograph in 1851, The Peculiar Case of the Morrison Twins, a study in unprecedented human connection. It was carefully researched, extensively documented, and meticulously written. It presented the facts without excessive speculation, allowing readers to draw their own conclusions. The monograph was widely read and hotly debated. It became one of the most referenced texts in early parapsychology and anomalous medicine. Even today, researchers studying twins, consciousness, and unexplained phenomena cite Pemberton's work on the Morrison twins. But for all the study and debate, no one ever provided a satisfactory explanation for what happened to Sarah and Samuel Morrison. Medical science in the 1850s couldn't account for their shared sensations, their synchronized injuries and illnesses, their apparent ability to share consciousness. And it certainly couldn't explain the phenomena that surrounded their final days, the moving objects, the temperature anomalies, the brilliant light at the moment of death. Some theories were proposed. One theory suggested the twins had an undetected physical connection. Perhaps their nervous systems were somehow linked through means that 19th-century medicine couldn't detect. This might explain shared sensations, but did little to explain the paranormal phenomena or their synchronized death. Another theory proposed that the twins represented some kind of genetic anomaly that created an unprecedented level of biological synchronization. But genetics was barely understood in 1850, and this theory was more speculation than explanation. Psychological theories suggested the twins' connection was primarily mental, that through years of close association and unconscious signaling, they had trained themselves to be extraordinarily synchronized. But this didn't explain how one twin's injury could manifest in the other twin's body with no physical contact. Paranormal theories suggested the twins were connected on some spiritual or psychic level that transcended physical reality. This might explain all the phenomena but couldn't be tested or proven by the science of the era. Religious interpretations varied. Some saw the twins as blessed by God, their connection a miracle. Others saw them as cursed or possessed, their connection demonic in origin. Most religious authorities took a cautious middle ground, acknowledging the phenomena were real but declining to declare them either divine or demonic. Ultimately, the Morrison twins case was filed away as an unsolved mystery. The documentation was extensive, the witnesses were credible, the phenomena were real, but no satisfactory explanation emerged. And as years passed, the case faded from active medical interest. By the late 19th century, it was primarily of historical interest, a curious footnote in the history of medicine and the study of twins. The Morrison family never fully recovered from the loss. Mary Morrison died in 1859, aged just 52. Those who knew her said she never got over losing Sarah and Samuel. Thomas Morrison lived until 1872, but was described as a shell of his former self. The older Morrison children married and moved away, wanting distance from the memories of what had happened to their younger siblings. The Morrison cabin, where the twins had lived and died, eventually fell into disrepair and was abandoned. The property was sold in the 1880s, and the cabin was torn down. The only remaining physical trace of the Morrison twins is their grave in the family cemetery, now located on private property, but occasionally visited by researchers and curious seekers who have heard the story. In the 20th century, interest in the Morrison twins case revived periodically. Researchers studying twins, consciousness, and anomalous phenomena rediscovered Dr. Pemberton's monograph and Dr. Carlisle's notes. In the 1930s, parapsychology researchers examined the case as potential evidence of psychic phenomena. They noted the similarities between the phenomena around the Morrison twins and phenomena reported in poltergeist cases: moving objects, temperature changes, unexplained lights. In the 1960s, twin researchers became interested in the case as an extreme example of twin connection. Studies had shown that twins, especially identical twins, often displayed remarkable synchronization. But nothing in modern twin research approached the level of connection the Morrison twins had demonstrated. In the 1980s, quantum physicists became intrigued by the case. The phenomenon of quantum entanglement, where particles remain connected regardless of distance, seemed to offer a potential framework for understanding how the Morrison twins might have been connected. Could consciousness itself be subject to quantum entanglement? Could the twins' connection represent some kind of macro-scale quantum effect? These are speculative ideas, and no serious physicist would claim quantum entanglement can explain the Morrison twins. But the case continues to inspire theoretical thinking about the nature of consciousness and connection. In recent decades, neuroscience has offered new perspectives. We now understand that the brain is far more plastic and capable of unusual configurations than 19th century physicians imagined. Some neurologists have suggested the Morrison twins might have had brains that were wired in unprecedented ways, creating neural connections that transcended individual bodies. But this is speculation. We have no brain scans of the Morrison twins. We have no biological samples, no DNA to analyze, no physical evidence beyond the documented testimony of witnesses. All we have are the historical records, Dr. Carlisle's clinical notes, Dr. Pemberton's monograph, the testimony of family members and witnesses, newspaper accounts from the era, and the few physical artifacts that survive, primarily documents and the weathered gravestone. Modern skeptics have attempted to explain away the Morrison twins case. Some argue that the witnesses were fooled by clever trickery, that the twins were skilled performers who created the illusion of paranormal connection. But this explanation struggles to account for the medical examinations, the controlled experiments, and the fact that phenomena occurred even when the twins were unconscious or separated. Others suggest mass hysteria or shared delusion, that the community and even the doctors somehow convinced themselves they were seeing phenomena that weren't real. But the documentation is too extensive, and the witnesses too numerous and credible for this explanation to be fully satisfying. Some skeptics simply declare that the reports must be exaggerated or fabricated. But Dr. Carlisle and Dr. Pemberton were respected physicians with reputations for careful observation. Multiple independent witnesses confirmed the phenomena. The consistency of reports across different observers suggests something real was happening, even if we can't explain what it was. The Morrison twins' case remains unexplained. Nearly 200 years after their death, we have no definitive answer to what they were experiencing or how their extraordinary connection was possible. Were they victims of some rare medical condition that modern science might be able to explain? Were they experiencing genuine paranormal phenomena that transcend current scientific understanding? Were they connected through some quantum mechanism we don't yet comprehend? Was their connection psychological, spiritual, biological, or something entirely different? We don't know. We may never know. What we do know is that Sarah and Samuel Morrison lived and died in ways that challenged the understanding of everyone who encountered them. They demonstrated abilities and experienced phenomena that seemed impossible. They suffered greatly from their extraordinary connection. And they died together in circumstances that remain as mysterious as their lives. Their story stands as a reminder that despite all our scientific advances, there are still aspects of human experience that we cannot fully explain. Consciousness remains one of the deepest mysteries of existence. The nature of identity, the boundaries of individual selfhood, the potential for connection between minds, these questions continue to challenge our understanding. The Morrison twins lived at those boundaries. They existed in a space where the normal rules of individual identity didn't seem to apply. They experienced connection that was so complete it may have ultimately been incompatible with life itself. Whether their case represents a rare anomaly, a glimpse of undiscovered natural phenomena, or something genuinely paranormal, we cannot say with certainty. We can only honor their memory, acknowledge their suffering, and recognize that their story raises questions we still cannot answer. Closing reflection. In a small family cemetery on what was once the Morrison property in eastern Kentucky, two weathered stones mark a single grave. Most people pass by without noticing. Few know the story of the twins buried there. But for those who do know the story, standing at that grave raises profound questions. What were Sarah and Samuel Morrison? Were they two people who were extraordinarily connected? Or were they somehow one consciousness that had been divided into two bodies, struggling their entire lives to reunite? When they died in that flash of light, did they truly die? Or did they finally achieve the unity their connection seemed to demand? A unity that required leaving behind the physical bodies that had kept them separate. These questions have no answers. They are mysteries that resist solution, puzzles that have no pieces we can assemble into a complete picture. Perhaps that's as it should be. Perhaps some mysteries are meant to remain unsolved, some questions to remain unanswered, some aspects of existence to remain beyond our comprehension. The Morrison twins lived in the space of mystery. They existed at the edge of what human experience can be. And in doing so, they remind us that for all our knowledge and all our science, there are still frontiers of human potential and human mystery that we have barely begun to explore. Their story is not comforting. It offers no easy answers, no tidy resolution, no satisfying explanation. But it is true, or as true as historical documentation can establish. Something extraordinary happened to Sarah and Samuel Morrison. Something that 16 witnesses described in consistent terms. Something that 2 respected physicians examined and documented. Something that defied explanation in 1850 and continues to defy explanation today. This is the macabre mystery of the twins that not even science can explain. A mystery rooted in documented history, supported by credible testimony, and yet remaining as inexplicable now as it was nearly 2 centuries ago. Perhaps future advances in neuroscience, quantum physics, or consciousness studies will eventually provide answers. Perhaps we will discover natural mechanisms that could account for the phenomena the Morrison twins displayed. Or perhaps their story will remain forever beyond our understanding, a reminder that reality is stranger and more mysterious than our theories can accommodate, and that human experience sometimes ventures into territories where science cannot follow. Sarah and Samuel Morrison. Born together, lived together, died together. 2 bodies, one unfathomable connection, a mystery that time has not solved and may never solve. They rest now in the Kentucky soil that gave them birth, together in death as they were in life, united beyond separation, connected beyond understanding. The mystery remains, authors note. This documentary script is based on historical research into documented cases of unusual twin connections in the 19th century. While the specific details of Sarah and Samuel Morrison's case represent a synthesis of multiple historical accounts and some necessary reconstruction due to incomplete records, the core phenomena described, shared sensations, synchronized injuries, apparent consciousness merging, and unexplained physical phenomena, are based on actual documented cases from this period. The 19th century produced numerous reports of unusual twin connections, though few were as extensively documented as the case presented here. Medical journals from the era contain scattered accounts of twins displaying extraordinary synchronization, though the quality of documentation varies widely. Modern twin research has confirmed that twins, especially identical twins, can display remarkable levels of synchronization and connection. However, the extreme manifestations described in this narrative represent either rare anomalies, phenomena that science does not yet fully understand, or cases where historical documentation may have exaggerated or misinterpreted natural phenomena. Regardless of the ultimate explanation, these historical accounts remind us that human biology and consciousness contain mysteries we are still working to unravel. The boundaries between individual minds may be more flexible than we typically assume, and the potential for human connection may extend into territory that challenges our current understanding. This narrative honors all twins who have experienced unusual connections, and all families who have struggled to understand and support children, whose experiences defied conventional explanation. May their stories continue to inspire careful research, open-minded investigation, and compassionate understanding of the full spectrum of human experience.